that life looked very precious. The world looked more beautiful. Time became so valuable that I tried to squeeze every second I could out of every hour. I suddenly realized how many things there were to be done that I hadn't done and I still wanted to do, and places to see and friends to talk with. But most of all, I suddenly knew the goodness, I think, of God. Because every death is a beginning. And every death is the homecoming of the prodigal, whose father is waiting for him on the top of that distant hill with his arms extended in expectation of his arrival. And the road is beautiful and life is wonderful and it's very dear to be here. But for a person who has faith and a determination to fit himself into God's plan, the end of the road is the really exciting time. And that's the more abundant life.
Well, thank you, and God bless you, Father Lloyd, for coming here.
Thank you, George, for the chance.
When you come to that word love, of course, you come to one of the most difficult words in the world to define. It's one of those words that includes everything. Alice in Wonderland called it a portmanteau word, the kind of word into which you can stick anything. So you love French fried onions, you love your mother. You just love a new hat, and you love your husband. It's one of those words that you just use for such a variety of things that when you come to it, you say to yourself, well, what does it mean? I remember talking to a very young catechetical class years ago, and they're the youngsters out of whose mouth, of course, comes wisdom. We were on faith, hope, and charity. And as I was a very young teacher, I tried to cover the three subjects in one evening. That was all, just faith, hope, and charity. Well, they got to know what faith meant, they got to know what hope meant. Finally, I said, what is love? Now, come on, children, think hard. What is love? And a little girl in the very front row rose, and she put her hands together, and she said, love is the sweetest thing. See, I thought that was perfect. St. Thomas himself couldn't have done better, huh? Now, when we talk tonight about love, let's understand we're talking about love. There's a lot of words, or at least there are two notable words, that we use as an equivalent for love, and they're no equivalent at all. The Gospel of a Sunday ago said, according to St. Paul, and there remain these three, faith, hope, and charity, and the greatest of these is charity. St. Paul wouldn't like that. He said it in a language which became Latin, and the translator took the word caritas, which is a rather lovely word, and turned the thing over into the English word charity, which is as ugly a word as anybody has ever had to listen to. I don't know why, but nobody likes charity, and everybody loves love. If you pretend for a moment that charity is the synonym for love, you don't know what you're talking about. Imagine the young man at that moment in his life when he is going to say the big, important fact and question, kneeling to the young lady and saying, darling, I wish you'd marry me. For you I feel great charity. He'd tell him to chase his charity down the street to somebody else. It's no equivalent, nor is the word philanthropy, which always makes me think of a stern man seated behind a desk and saying, before I give you that $25 from our great fund, have you collected $3,875,000? And when you say you haven't, you don't get the $25. That's philanthropy. And you never use the word philanthropy except in these modern, frigid connections. The impersonality of modern charity. Cold as charity. But love, love is a wonderful word. So the first thing that you have to recognize about love is the fact that love is not a matter of emotion nor necessarily of passion. Don't for a moment suggest that Father Lord says that emotion and passion may not have a great deal to do with love. I think I feel very sorry for any woman who is married to one of these great, strong, silent hunks of male, who never tells her he loves her anymore, never holds her hand. There is a sort of instinct in us. We are bodies and souls, and to express what's in our soul, we need our body. Somehow or other, we've got to have that. So a young couple walk along the street together, and all of a sudden, they begin to take hands. Now, that's the silliest performance in the world. You know, a couple of crooked claws gripping down here. As a matter of fact, it says things to her that nothing in the world could say. Or they get to the motion picture theater, they sit together, and suddenly their shoulders touch. And the whole place is Technicolor. No matter what the film is. Love is one of those things that you will best express in your deeds, as St. Ignatius says, or you best express at a time when you're feeling no emotion at all. There's the mother who dearly and devotedly loves that little youngster of hers. Oh, the first moment that they laid that baby in her hand, she with her antiseptic veil across her face, wishing she could kiss it. And the moment when she sees the little child go off to its first communion. Wonderful. When does she love it most? At 3 o'clock in the morning. When does a man love his country best? In the trenches. When he gives up a $25,000 a year job to go into the Army or Navy or one of the services. Any thrills? Any emotions? Not the least. Now this strange thing called love, which we're going to discuss more in detail this evening, is a very wonderful thing, and a thing that we ought in some way to understand. I can remember my dear old Irish professor of philosophy, God bless him, Paul Gleason, who used to look out at us from eyebrows that were like Osage hedges that had never been cut. And he'd say, I feel sorry for you young men if the day ever comes when you have to live in a world that's ruled by atheists. No man can be an atheist for any length of time and remain a decent guy. Something's going to crack, and maybe it's going to be you. I remember I used to sit in the back of the class and say, oh, yeah? Well, we've seen atheism on a big scale now. We saw it practiced by Hitler. We saw it practiced by Stalin. We see it practiced in the communist countries, and now we know. Nobody has to prove it to us anymore. We know what atheism does in terms of concentration camps and the complete destruction of the rights of people. We know that. What did the Lord really tell us to do? One of the most exciting things and the strangest things is that though in the church we priests, and I strike my own breast, are constantly talking about the Ten Commandments, the Lord never did. Just never did. Only once does he mention them explicitly, and then he doesn't call them the 10. That was the time when the rich young man came to see him, and he said, Lord, what shall I do to be saved? Well, the Lord heard that a dozen times a day from people who were fakers. They wanted to pretend that they were interested. So he just, in a casual kind of way, said, oh, keep the commandments. Well, the young fellow said, I've been doing that all my life. You have, said the Lord? Oh. And he looked at him and he loved him. And he said, well, if you really, really want to be perfect, you want to do a good job, go sell what you have and give it to the poor, love your neighbor, and come and follow me. Love God. Once the Ten Commandments were shoved right into his face, the Pharisee came up to him and he said, now, which is the greatest commandment? That's a trick question, because you're often asked that kind of question in the hope that you'll pick out one. And then the person who asks you can say, see, he despises the other 9. So he knew it was a trick. They expected him to say, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery. That was a favorite even in those days. Thou shalt not lie, or so on. But he didn't. He said, you want to know the great commandment? Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with thy whole mind, heart, soul, and strength. And there's another commandment, by the way. It's very much like that. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Now, if you keep those 2 commandments, everything is going to be wonderful. That's the law. That's the prophets. That's the solution. Go out and do it.